Hungary. October 23rd, 1956 marked a period of counter-revolutionary insurgency in Hungary. Getting a little further past World War II. Still a lot of residual fascists in Hungary in the 50s, though. Caused by the subversive actions of Imre Nagy's reformist faction and the mistakes made by the country's leadership during Hungary's industrialization. Mistakes is an understatement. They horribly bumbled it. Armed militants attacked state and party institutions throughout Hungary. The Budapest Committee of the Hungarian Workers' Party was stormed and burned to the ground, as communists and Soviet sympathizers began to be killed en masse throughout the country. So, yep, they're going and rounding up and killing socialists throughout the country. Nagy's government supported the insurgency and announced the dissolution of the Hungarian Workers' Party and Hungary's withdrawal from the Warsaw Pact, calling on NATO to protect Hungarian democracy. Democracy, really? So it's democracy when you round up and mass murder leftists? I.e. Indonesian genocide style? The army and a considerable part of the party apparatus also joined the faction, fighting. Yeah, use the army, not full-fledged military operation, so don't fire on civilians, but again, under pressure from Marshal Zhukov, Molotov, and Kaganovich, Molotov was kind of a bastard, but anyways, it was decided to intervene and suppress the rebellion. At the initiative of J. Kadar, F. Munich, and other Hungarian communists, steps were taken to create a new government that called Soviet troops into the country. On the evening of November 3rd, the military command of the Pushis, Push is a type of insurgency, coup, violent uprising, were arrested at the Tekel military base. After which special corps units began moving to Budapest and other major cities of the country. The Hungarian army fled, dropping their weapons, after which the resistance to the fascist gangs were quickly suppressed. So yeah, fascists were rounding up and killing leftists. The new party of the left, the Hungarian Socialist Workers' Party, was led by Janos Kadar, who carried out purges of both right and left elements. Left ones too? Come on, buddy. Imre Nagy tried to take refuge in the Yugoslav embassy, but was extradited at our request and executed along with his associates. The situation is under control. And this is showing KGB loyalty, power, army power, financial reserve. History. I didn't see God. The doctrines of various religious groups, especially that of the Russian Orthodox Church, remain influential within the Soviet Union. However, as you know, when Yuri Gagarin went to space, he did not notice any evidence pointing to the existence of God. Does this not confirm one of the fundamental theses of Marxism and of scientific atheism? Not of Marxism. Marx had some serious issues with particularly the Catholic Church. But it was really Lenin who twisted this into state atheism. You might call Marx an agnostic or a skeptic, probably, but not the kind of militant atheist that Lenin was. And, you know, Marx was a human being. He was wrong about some things. His economic theories were correct, but, I mean, there's a thing. It's called Christian socialism. There's a whole movement. Personally, I'm a Marxist. I'm a Christian. I think Jesus would have told us to take better care of the poor, and capitalism inherently runs contrary to that. You have billionaires, you have private ownership of the means of production. It's going to create billionaires. That's going to create people who will inevitably tear up welfare systems, create wars of imperialism all around the globe, carry out foreign genocides, etc. So, and that history is well established. The British, the Italians, obviously the Germans, the United States, through its puppet regimes, but also actually, you know, don't forget the concentration camps, and the Japanese and the massacre of Native Americans have carried out genocide, conquest, over and over. Capitalism leads to imperialism. And that's not something Jesus would have wanted people doing. Anyways, can strengthen atheist propaganda. Leave it be. Shouldn't violate freedom or not violate the freedom of conscience. Gagarin is not our god. I guess you have a different leader. You can choose a fourth option to actually go more religious. Yeah. Wait, this affects the game is the strength of religious institutions, which cost money but make the population happier. They also slow scientific progress in the game. So, strengthen atheist propaganda, have some, or leave people free to pick. Although science is important, stability is probably more important, and this is the right thing, so don't violate the freedom of conscience, so kind of scold Gagarin a little bit on the quiet. Certain easing of religious policy followed. The open oppression of believers was stopped, the rate of atheist agitation reduced, the return of temples and other objects of worship to the Russian Orthodox Church began, which led to an increase in the influence of the Church, its ideas in the mind of the people. I do it now, and I have to do it in a period of instability. Czechoslovakia. Since 1967, the situation in Czechoslovakia began to destabilize. The reformist forces, most of which were previously members of the Social Democratic Party, just part of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia, so the Social Democrats are as far left as capitalism goes, but they're still capitalists. Is usually people think, oh, we need to harness capitalism or take the best of both systems, which is bullshit, because capitalism will inevitably destroy the gains of, how am I doing for time? Oh, geez, almost an hour. Yeah, of social democrats. Like, Nordic democracies may be great, but they're inherently unstable. And you see them slowly losing their achievements today. Now there's no Soviet Union for the ruling class to be scared into leaving social democracy alone. You see billionaires in Sweden, Finland, Norway, Denmark are slowly tearing up the welfare state or working to weaken it. Somewhat, it's not very apparent yet, but it will be in the future as that accelerates. Anyways, so they may mean well, but they're wrong. Went an offensive against the conservative leadership of the CPC, demanding widespread reforms. From the beginning of 1968, a struggle unfolded, already within the highest echelon of the party and political leadership of the state, in which the Soviet Union supported the young reformer, Alexander Dubček, who was considered a pro-Soviet politician. In January 1968, became first secretary of the Central Committee of the CPC. However, after coming to power, he began drastic reforms. He's thought to be like a moderate reformer who was pro-Soviet, and he hid his true colors, including the abolition of social guarantees. So that's tearing up the welfare system. Doesn't sound much like a social democratic move there. Tearing up the welfare system, the transition to a market economy, and criticism of the Soviet Union by radio and newspaper. The undermining position of the CPC transformation actually led to the withdrawal of Czechoslovakia from the Warsaw Pact, which would help the U.S. to win the Cold War bad, and the collapse of the socialist system. The leadership of the Soviet Union and all countries of Eastern Europe tried by peaceful means to persuade Dubček to stop, but he, hoping for the support of NATO, the European communists, and China, refused any compromise. Then the issue of forceful intervention was raised. An army to restore socialism. It's unfortunate. If it's true he tore up even welfare systems, it's clear he was not really even a social democrat. He was a neoliberal shit who had been pretending to be something else. Just before the invasion, Soviet Defense Minister Grechko called his Czechoslovakian counterpart Emzur and warned him about the upcoming action, warning him against resistance. At 2300 hours on August 20th, so 11 p.m., the troops of the Soviet, Polish, Hungarian, Eastern German, and Bulgarian forces under the command of Army General I.G. Pavlovsky crossed the Czechoslovak border. There was no sniffant resistance to them, and the Slovakian population in particular, the peasants, even welcomed the Soviet forces. That's because historically, the Czech portion of the Czechoslovakian population has had a long history of oppressing Slovakian portion, which tend to be poorer, less educated, more rural, and looked down on as a result of those things. Even welcomed the Soviet forces as the guarantor of the preservation of social benefits, renouncing the Czech leaders. The entire leadership of Czechoslovakia was arrested and taken to Moscow. Now, led by conservative Gustav Husak, not conservative in the sense of right-wing, conservative is conserving socialism, began the rollback of reforms, which received the support of the Slovakian moderate reformers under Vasil Biljak, who had previously been an ally of Dubček, but did not accept further anti-Soviet, anti-socialist reforms. So he thought the guy went too far, because he very much, that guy, Dubček was clearly a liar and a snake. After the disappearance of Dubček's forces, Czechoslovakia was finally transformed from a unitary state to a federal one. So Slovakia got some level of independence after this. Semi-independence. Probably reward their loyalty. I say this with some Czech ancestor myself. Like, I say the Czechs, the way they treated the Slovakians is shameful. I mean it. And Czechoslovakia is no longer one country. Today in the modern world, it's two: Czech Republic and Slovakia, because partly of that history. So the right thing would have been for it to remain a united country and high taxes in Czech areas to help undo the, systematic generations of oppression and exploitation of the Slovakian population, lifting it up. Because there was a long history of underdevelopment, of taxing the poor areas and bringing money into richer areas. And keeping political power out of the hands of Slovakians and so forth. Anyways, 1965-1970, Lieberman's reform, supported by Kostin, developed under Khrushchev and taking strong influence from the Hungarian reforms, envisaged the expansion of the economic independence of enterprises, associations, and organizations, the widespread use of material incentives, the raising of consumer costs. So, raising prices, which was a problem in the Soviet Union. The artificial low prices would lead to people being able to afford all the goods they can want, but there not being enough on the shelves. Sometimes this could, even before the shortages of the 80s, when the Soviet Union was collapsing and there were severe shortages and empty shelves, but too often there were waiting lists for things, not because things weren't being produced, but because the prices were so low that stuff got snapped up very quickly after it was made. Whereas in the US, you have things that sit on shelves to the point that sometimes they go bad and get thrown out rather than people getting to use them. Grocery stores in particular throw out enormous amounts of food rather than just lower prices and sell it to people who desperately need it. And farmers destroy a lot of food just because they either could see it as they overproduce more than the population can eat, or they just can't make a profit selling. Meanwhile, people in some inner cities end up starving. Although how that happens, I'm not quite sure, but the food stamps should be enough these days before the recent cuts, should have been enough for people to eat reasonably. I don't know if they were increased during COVID or something. I only ended up on them when I got long COVID myself, so I don't know if they've been lower in the past. But there is a problem with hunger. It's probably people who are, for one reason or another, prevented from getting food stamps disqualified, such as being undocumented immigrants in certain cases, etc. Although, anyways, raising consumer costs and introduction of the profitability principle into the planned economy. It's not selling things for less than profitable. Yeah, I mean, these things make sense. You might not want billionaire owners, but prices should reflect the cost of production. Whatever. Ideally, you should be paying the workers everything. You should be running things at a zero net profit. Where, there are problems with this, but it makes a certain amount more sense than producing stuff at a loss. While reducing the planned indicators, of course, sometimes certain things have externalities that benefit the population. Lieberman estimated the cost of his reforms to be the value of the paper on which it was written. The idea of the OGAS being pushed onto the back shelf. So, he wants to reduce Gosselin's influence and have more incentives. Increasing economic independence, as long as it's not actually sliding into private ownership, that should be fine. In some ways less efficient, but until mass computerization makes more central planning more viable, which in this the advent of computer technology in this game will actually make planning more efficient. Partially support the reform, cancel at the right moment, fully implement it, or focus on the idea of automation more. Automation is important, yes. This will, by the way, in game terms, I think, this gives you 2 automation techs at the beginning, so greater technological efficiency. This is probably what historically happened, partially supporting, but fully implement the forms. Yeah. An experiment was carried out at the Shisenko, this is definitely not what historically happened, is fully supporting them. The Shisenko chemical plant introduced the main provisions of the reform. Its results were approved by the Central Committee, after which reforms began to be introduced throughout the country, but officials blocked the decision to expand the responsibility of the directors of enterprises. The first stage, the reform yielded promising results. In 1966, a record harvest of 171.5 million tons of grain was collected, with yield of 13.7 centners per hectare. Some sort of yield of agricultural production. Soviet unit. The state purchasing, or is that metric tons? I don't know. Anyways, the state purchasing 75 million tons of grain. The average annual production had almost doubled. The production of grain, cotton, sugar, beets, sunflowers, meat, milk, and eggs increased by 30%. The profit of industrial enterprises reached 96.3 billion rubles, an increase of 7 times, of which 40 billion remained with enterprises themselves. The national income increased by 4%, productivity by 37%, and industrial production by 50%. Yeah, something like this would have short-term benefits, but long-term costs. However, since 1968, the growth rates began to fall, earlier than they did historically, and the rate for improving competitiveness failed. Of the 20,378 million rubles left to enterprises, only 7.77 million were invested in the renewal of fixed assets. Yeah, because a lot of it was hopefully higher wages. There was a chronic shortage of consumer goods, especially food, which forced the Soviet Union to increase its purchases abroad. Isn't this supposed to prevent you from having to buy stuff abroad? Guess it didn't work out. There must be a roll of the day. It seemed good at first, but then didn't work out. But with a less planned economy, at least less shocks from any, if things somehow get forced towards even less planning, where things can be kept steady in a crisis period. There are a lot of potential advantages to planning, but it requires great skill and delicacy to do optimally. That's for sure. That being said, the Soviet Union had a heavily planned approach and did outgrow the West. Did not surpass it, but it was making up. It started a massive disadvantage. It was slowly closing it. Of course, China closed its gap with the West much quicker and actually now has a larger economy than the United States as of 2025. In absolute terms, not per person yet, but in absolute terms, the Chinese economy is bigger than the United States economy by a small margin. Something that people are constantly in denial of or find bullshit scapegoats like immigrants. This is part why the U.S. isn't collapsed now, really it is, into fascism, is because this simple thing is shocking to a lot of Americans who thought they were always going to be, thought we would always be the wealthiest country in the world, blah, blah, blah. We, for a long time, not had the highest GDP per capita, and now we don't have the largest GDP, period. And we're falling further and further behind. Capitalism eats itself, and especially right-wing capitalism like the U.S. has, as opposed to social democracy. The space race, which began in 1957, was de facto lost by the U.S. Despite our great achievements, the first satellite, the first manned spaceflight, the first spacewalk, the first landing on a space object, yep, and the first photos of Venus and the moon were all Soviet achievements, correct. This Americans won one thing, we got to the moon first, and then we said, oh, we won. No, we really freaking didn't. We only pulled ahead at the very end. We lost achievement after achievement, and then we arbitrarily decided the race was over. The Americans landed on the moon, photographed Mars, and sent spacecraft to Jupiter and Saturn, snatching away our long-sought victory. Now it is 1975, and we have to spend vast sums of money in order to support our socialist countries, not to mention the lives of our people. We have almost no spare funds to support the space race. There's not much benefit to it, and there isn't expected to be any for the next few centuries. Many people no longer see any sense in it. Perhaps we should finally put an end to the space race? No. The propaganda importance, enormous. This one decision alone, if it had been different, might have prevented the Soviet Union from falling. It was a very close thing historically and almost didn't happen. Of course, it would have, if it survived, it would have been like the marginal victory you can get in this game, where the Soviet Union would have lost control of the Warsaw Pact, probably had several republics succeed and only continue on in a reduced form. Make peace with the U.S., stop the space race. You can make peace with the U.S., what? Peaceful space race continues, or you can let it grow into an armed conflict. Do an armed conflict space? Would this end the game early? Peaceful space race continues anyways. This will just antagonize countries more. Yeah. From 1975 to 85, the grand Soviet-American space race continued, leading up to the creation of a manned reusable space transport system. Reusable spacecraft, way ahead of what historically happened. First of these being the space shuttle in the US, and second being the Energia Buran, and it's referring to shuttles, okay. And the Soviet Union, with the former having been put into regular operation since 1981. U.S. space shuttles and the latter being used to carry out unmanned tests, make it possible to implement manned flights to the moon and Mars with the delivery of research equipment. So that's just a kind of continuation of history, the Buran shuttle.